there have been a whole set of steps taken by you, the government, and also the various other policymakers, which have handled the COVID period remarkably well for India. Whether it steps in the real sector, whether it is supporting the weaker sections, whether it is a balance between fiscal deficit and monetary policy, whether it is ensuring that the capital markets are open and vibrant, we have seen a wonderful alignment and a symphony of activities to hold India together on the economic front throughout what I would say is the most difficult period of history that we have ever seen. Therefore, I wanted on behalf of all my colleagues in business and industry and all my colleagues from CII to compliment you and the government to really handle this situation with deftness. I also see the fruits of patience and sustained effort beginning to show. The GST numbers are showing great buoyancy. We are now more than 2 to 3 months post the COVID 2.0, and we have seen the economy coming back into its stride. The month of July, post April, May, June, showed the first sign of vibrancy. Early days so far in August, but continuing to show optimism, and we are seeing it on the ground in terms of the levels of activity. We are also better planned, I think, as a country for handling the challenges. God forbid if COVID-3 came in any form which is not mild, but we are ready for taking steps to ensure that our capacity is in a much better shape. The vaccination speed has increased. We are now doing more than 50 lakh vaccines a day. So many pieces which had been challenges for us in the real world and the health world are also coming into shape. And therefore, ma'am, the time has come for us, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, for us to increase our risk-taking and increase our animal spirit, something which you have been telling for a while. And I'm sure business and industry would really like to hear your perspective on that. The important areas which I think we will have to look at from here in the context of the rest of the world is the fact that is inflation, which is likely to come back, is it going to be transitory or is it going to be more structural? And how do we cope up with the challenges as on the fiscal side, the need for RBI to expand its balance sheet and at the same time ensure that the inflation wolf does not become more structural as we go for growth. One of the most important aspects in growth is to see that we have a stable policy regime which sustains over a period of time. Similarly, one of the other major changes which we are witnessing, ma'am, as we talk, is the means of financing which are now taking shape. Historically, India has been a much more bank-led and a bank-supported financing model. We are now seeing the power of capital markets, both equity markets and in recent times, even the debt markets, beginning to demonstrate much greater ability to provide financing and capital for businesses. This, again, is also supporting the new age economy companies. And we are seeing a very robust, vibrant, and an open capital flow, both international savings as well as domestic savings flowing into the capital markets. The need for us is to ensure that this flow of capital continues and we build a sustained growth of the capital market engine through these interesting times. We therefore have two engines firing for us. The banking industry has weathered the storm reasonably well. At the same time, capital markets are giving the financing and the growth impetus, including to the new age companies. How do we ensure that going forward, we have a progressive and a world-class regulatory framework and a coordinated approach, both on banking and capital markets, to sustain financing of the Indian economy going forward? And I genuinely believe India has the opportunity to be Atmanirbhar in the real world, Atmanirbhar in the financial world, when at the same time we continue to attract foreign capital because India needs it for growth, but also combine it with a strong flow of domestic capital which builds on trust and transparency. Madam, you're leading this charge at a very crucial juncture of the Indian economy. Your words today are something we look forward to. And at the same time, we would be delighted to keep this open dialogue and partnership between the government and industry to continue flowing in the days, weeks, and the years ahead. May I request you for your views and comments to share with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, CII, for yet another opportunity to interact with you. I've never shied from admitting that interactions with the CII has always yielded very good inputs for me, learnings for me, and has played a very significant role pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and if I can safely use the word, post-pandemic as well, as we are in it now. By the interactions that I've had with the CII, and particularly Mr. Kotak, I should admit, you have been at a one-on-one and also through the CII kept that momentum of consultation going. Each of your members have also been actively seizing every opportunity that you may have to interact with me. And of course, as and when Prime Minister has invited you all, have had a very extensive conversation. And for a nation to go through, along with the global community, a pandemic which has never been seen for the last 100 years, I think Indian economy is benefited by the collective participation, thinking, and coordination of efforts. And that is why today we are sitting up and speaking about India 75, which is at 2022. To be able to sit up after a second wave, which was unprecedented, nobody could predict the intensity, the scale, the speed with which the second wave reached us, could have taught us sitting up a couple of months afterwards to say, how do we want India to move towards India 2022, when India will be 75 years free of a foreign rule? So that itself shows what collective participation, collective thinking, collective sharing of thoughts, and all our efforts being put together can give India. I particularly thank the Indian industry for having been very level-headed, faced the challenge of the first, and even faced the challenge of the second wave of COVID, where many countries are still wondering how they would face the economy and also pick the economy from where it is left behind. So, meeting as we are at this juncture,
request everybody to please put your microphone on mute when the Honorable Finance Minister is speaking, please.
So, I can always, from our side? I can always recall how after the lockdown in 2020, we saw the government ensuring, first of all, that lives have to be saved. And for full 8 months, we had government supporting the poorest of the poor, the vulnerable population of India, 80 crores of people being given their food grain supply free of cost. Together with it, also some money in their Jan Dhan accounts, and above all, also cooking fuel for 3 full months. 8 months this continued, and we could see that when in comparison to many of the countries outside, no Indian was left feeling hungry and then having to go to bed. And unlike the early 20th century pandemic, where more people apparently died of hunger and starvation and malnutrition rather than by the pandemic itself, India has ensured, because of the foresighted quickness with which Prime Minister Modi responded, India has ensured that no poor, dispossessed Indian remains starving. No Indian would go to bed without a meal of some sort. So with that major humanistic approach, which a government is duty-bound to take, we saw that the first and the basic humanitarian problem was at least somewhat addressed. Post that, efforts were taken, and the first quarter, the last quarter of last year, or the first 3 months of this calendar year, you saw manufacturing growing by about 6.9%, construction growing by about 14.5%, and even tractor sales in the rural areas going up by 18%. So the core sector's growth of about 8.9% was, if I may say, was largely because of the public capital expenditure. Government's capital expenditure being pushed with a great force behind, with the complete energies of the Prime Minister being showcased and also very clearly driving the ministries, particularly those ministries which had an infrastructure bandwidth, to ensure that the money which was being given to them, which was declared in the budget, an unprecedented commitment made for industry, infrastructure sector. So the monitoring of the public capex was clearly from the level of the Prime Minister, Finance Minister, respective infrastructure related ministries. And so the public expenditure ensured that the core sector grew and grew at about nearly 9% growth, 8.9%. One of the big story about the pandemic affected Indian economy last year and this year, FDIs have been flowing into India non-stop because there was this confidence about the macroeconomic fundamentals, about how the whole world was looking at shifting some of the investments from some geographical terrain to something else, and therefore they chose India. And as a result, you saw we probably were in the 3rd or the 4th place in 2020 in getting FDI. And even this year, in the first 5 months of this year, we have had about 37% more FDI coming into this country compared to the last. Last year itself was FDI good story. FDI comfortably flowing into India. But this year, we find that in the first 5 months, there's a 37% increase compared even with the good last year. Foreign exchange reserves are at 620 billion as of July 2021. So the indicators are very clear that the economy is buoyant, and the buoyant economy, buoyant in the sense of recovery time buoyancy. It can, of course, aspire for more, but the recovery is very clear. The messages and the indications which are coming are very clear that the economy is revving to come out. And one story which I would definitely want to pick up on is a 2019 story, which is a pre-pandemic story. All of you are aware that at that time the issue was credit, availability of credit, want of credit, businesses suffering for not having credit. So the banks sitting over tons of money and credit not being given to them. I remember going all around the country well before the festive season and hearing people tell me, no, I'm sorry, it's not happening, credit is not available. And since then, we had announced a credit outreach, which commenced sometime late September, early October. And since then till today, nearly 5 lakh crores have been put into the economy through the various credit outreach programs. Even that 1 year, between 19 October, September, October, till about March, we had already achieved over 2 lakh crores. But totally today, 5 lakh crores have purely gone on account of credit outreach, which banks were nudged to take up, and they had taken it up. So I would want to just spend one little more minute to tell you that if you were to look at the 4 crucial engines, net exports, today the story, you know what is happening, exports are really growing. And some of the exports are particularly the steel and some core industries which are happening here. The industry themselves are saying, yes, the growth is phenomenal. Public investments, I've said that infrastructure investments are at one of the highest ever in India's history in terms of the proportionate amount being given and spent as well. Consumption has been given all the boost which it requires. Through the supply side management, we made sure that the essential instruments are activated so that industries, the small ones, are making sure that they are not going to be down under, their employees will be kept up. The EPFO support that the government has given, today the figure, committed figure, continues to remain open. Many industries, particularly the MSME sector, has benefited by the government's contribution into the EPFO. That has been extended now till 2022. Although last year when we announced it, we said it will be available till June 2021. Where are Indians saving or investing? That's a 4th engine that normally all of us would like to talk about. And this is one example which I've quoted probably even the last time I spoke to you. Indians are not anymore looking at just bank savings. They're quite open to going into the stock market, looking at very well listed, well accounted, well transparently managed companies, and they are investing through very openly opening up demat accounts. And if the number of new demat accounts opening is an indicator to where the Indians are putting their savings, you will be surprised that per month, where it was 1 lakh accounts, today it is multiplied by 3 per month. So 3 lakh accounts have been opening up during the last year pandemic, and this year too it is continuing. So Indians are putting money into the market and taking shares in companies which are managed well. Now, if I were to just tell you in 6 different headings, the way in which Indian government is looking at, our government is looking at being an active participant in the recovery of this economy. First thing is, government is committed, first of all, to doing everything that it requires to be done for the economy to be revived. And since last year, the 5 mini budget, this budget, where very clearly money has been put where it matters. Infrastructure, health infrastructure, giving money for vaccination, because that is sure shot one way in which you can protect your citizens, creating pediatric center just in case, God forbid, there is a 3rd wave. So government's commitment for recovery is shown in so many different ways, and we are going to continue doing that because recovery and its sustainability is something which the Prime Minister is very keenly invested in. Second, the pandemic and just the recovery is not the story. You would have seen in the monsoon session how much ever there were disturbances for political purposes. Ministry of Finance and Corporate Affairs alone has cleared 7 very critical bills, whether it is on the deposit insurance for the small depositors whose cooperative bank or anything gets into difficult times, we are taking care of the depositors there. The tribunal bill, through which the delay in cases which are going through different levels of justice and then ending up in the courts, as much consuming that much money and also time, we brought in that. Abolish some of the tribunals which are really not managing too many cases, and made sure that justice is delivered directly by the courts rather than one intermediary layer of a tribunal. Factoring regulation, which was introduced last time but went to a standing committee, which has come back, is again a major shift in being able to bring in more than 9,000 NBFCs who will now all across the country be available for factoring and helping the small, medium industries to have their bills discounted in various ways, different portfolios, and therefore they would be getting risk based or without risk, their money in time. The insolvency and the bankruptcy code, again passed this time with an amendment to the act for the pre-pack, which is a very informal way of handling the cases, less expensive way of handling it, and more approachable way of handling for the MSMEs. So that bill was also passed during this session. I think most importantly, all of us would be happy to know that the general insurance bill which was passed, amending the insurance act which existed from before, even if there is going to be a 51% or below giving away of government control. So there are, even in this narrow sessions, the Limited Liability Partnership Act, which is going to make it easy for so many small startups and also LLPs, which are nowadays taking off in very many numbers, because professionals like to have the flexibility of partnership and also have a better ease of doing business because the regulations are far better. Uday Kotak just spoke about regulations which have to be better. This is one way in which we have brought the regulatory mechanism to the minimum by looking at the compoundable offenses and also doing it through an internal mechanism rather than with the nature of criminality, taking it to the courts. The internal mechanism is far smoother and softer. More importantly, haven't we had industry each time telling us about, it's all right, you've done all this, what about the retrospective tax of 2012? I was glad that the Prime Minister spoke about it yesterday. He very clearly showed that if we respect the environment of stability and predictability which industry wants on the taxation regime, and as a result, you never approved of a retrospective application, and we have been in agreement with the industry even when we were in the opposition. You saw us waiting for the logical conclusion that is what that was required to be reached because of the tribunal sitting over them. Arbitration verdicts which were to be waited. Once the arbitrations came out with the judgments, we had already cleared and waited for the monsoon session to have this bill brought in. So with these, I think we are very clearly showing our commitment to reforms, Prime Minister Modi's commitments to reform, even during a pandemic. So we didn't seek cover under a very difficult and challenging time to say, no, we are taking care of the economy, we'll have to revive it, we have to attend to people who need all the help, and so let reforms wait. No, we didn't do that. Every bit of the opportunity that we've had, whether it is the farm laws, labor codes, the IBC current amendments, the factoring, bringing in microfinance institutions to lend more, which is not a parliamentary thing, but it was a scheme announced, tribunals being abolished, our commitment to reforms continue, and we are showing it very clearly with tangible steps that we've taken through the parliament. You also saw that from the budget, budget which was read in the parliament, that our commitment to disinvestment and privatization is firmly ingrained through a policy. The public sector enterprises policy, which was announced in the budget, clearly tells you that we go through a formulation which is before us, policy driven, parliament approved, and therefore the privatization and the disinvestment steps that we are taking are policy driven, no discretion there, and they shall continue with a particular calendar before us. And therefore, even now, I'm happy that Secretary Deepam, addressing CII yesterday, has very clearly named, saying Air India will happen, BPCL will happen, Concor will happen. Yes, all that will happen. And we will push for them to happen this year. Necessary rigorous work is going on. And we therefore commit ourselves to the disinvestment which was announced in the budget. And also together with it, industry will be happy to know, whilst on the one hand, disinvestment and privatization happens, on the other, we are also looking at asset monetization, about which I think quite a lot has been already spoken. We are carving out those assets from various different parts of the country, from the central government's public sector enterprises, and those assets are being monetized, largely land-based, and that is going to be available ready for many of the industries which would look for that kind of a backdrop, that kind of a firm, infra facility. That is one of the factor reforms that we are taking up. So if factor reforms have been bothering us all these years, labor has been reformed through the code. Now land, we are bringing the asset monetization. So I would want industry to be sure that on the third pillar that I'm telling you, that the policy-driven privatization, disinvestment will continue with the same fervor. One thing on which most of the industry normally worries about is how does the ministry and the RBI work together? I take it as a point to mention here that you would have observed that in Modi 2.0 particularly, and even earlier, the relationship with the RBI has been one of those in which we are working like partners to address the issues of the economy. Even now, even during pandemic, if the RBI and its monetary policy has been keeping the momentum in the right direction, and the fiscal side of things are being taken care of by the Ministry of Finance, that coordination continues, and that partly therefore addresses Uday Kotak's comment on what will happen to inflation, what happens to growth. I don't see that debate as this or that. Growth will have its priority. Growth will be given its importance. Growth will be pushed both by the Reserve Bank and by us. We also want to assure the industry that inflation, even today, in the last 10 years or 7 years, if you take a picture, has not ever crossed 6.1, 6.2. In fact, most often, except for seasonal ups and downs, inflation has been well within that band which is before us, which is keep your middle 4, you can't go below 2, nor can you ever cross 6. We've managed to keep that float proper. Very opposite to the previous 10 years, where it had touched double digits, particularly food inflation. So I want you to be assured as industry that it's, in my understanding, I'm not looking at a growth versus inflation. It's not growth versus inflation. We shall attend to inflation, keep it contained, take all the necessary steps, but never forget that growth is what is going to make the difference to the economy's revival, and growth is what is eventually going to remove poverty and bring in a certain level playing field for all the Indian citizens. The last is again a comment which was made. India has been very used historically to depend on the bank finances, whereas today the way in which financing is happening for industry is changing its contours, and we're happy for that. And we are, from the government side, taking every measure to make sure that the robustness of the equity market is maintained, but the debt market bond market will have to be deepened and widened, and the opportunities for Indian industry with Morgan Stanley listing also happening from the government side. We've given all the attention for it, and we've been meeting with people to ensure that listings happen in time. I've also been engaging with various sovereign funds. In the last month, we've been actively engaged with the USIBC, talking with them in detail about their expectations and the kind of work that they expect from Indian administration. So my emphasis is that the government is, as always, willing to hear, willing to take your inputs, definitely responding as and when, not waiting for budget to budget announcements in between as well. So I would seek the CII's assistance in keeping us constantly informed of the developments which are happening in the ground, which the industry is feeling, and which the industry feels that given a bit of push here or there, things can move faster. We are willing to hear, willing to respond. Equally, on the ease of doing business, regulatory framework to be a bit more meaningful. I can tell before you, one of the major things which the Prime Minister has been underlining is the income tax and GST related issues, making use of technology in such a way the discretion which is wielded by certain officers, which may have caused a lot of stress on the industry, is avoided. So the dependence on technology is far more. As a result, I'm glad to say that we are able to plug a lot of loopholes, and that is one of the reasons revenue and revenue buoyancy has today come to a level where we are sure that this year the GST compensation will be paid to all the states in time, so that they have money in time in their hands to undertake all the developmental activities they need to take. The buoyancy in direct taxation is also improving. You've seen sometimes to the critiques that direct tax is now becoming lesser than the indirect tax, and the burden on the ordinary man citizen is far more. That's not true. Now gradually income tax is also improving, direct taxation is improving. And with the disinvestment focus, I expect news also to improve and improve substantially, so that we shouldn't have much of a problem in addressing issues where money is required. And we are giving above all a clean trajectory to show how we shall bring the fiscal deficit down. It was required to be high because COVID year required all the money. The fiscal space was not there, but still we had to look at the other side, other way, even as the fiscal deficit was increasing. But we have played it responsibly. We shall bring it back with a certain trajectory, which I've given in the budget itself. So I will not repeat what the Prime Minister has said. I had said this once before also. It's time that the Indian industry comes out in a very big way, because today is the time for you to show the risk-taking abilities, take decisions to expand, corporate taxes at its lowest. This was done by us in October 19. Faceless systems are there. Taxation is, I would want to highlight this point, even I didn't intend to say it, but I will say it nevertheless. COVID has not been financed by taxation. Individual tax assessees have not been asked for one additional paisa to manage the corona, nor has industry been taxed to manage corona. We have not asked one extra paisa from anybody for us to manage the corona pandemic. So I would think this is the best time for Indian industry to ensure that everybody whose investment is coming out of some geographies are drawn towards India. You stand up for India, you partner with them, and you open up. And I can see totally new areas into which Indian industry is moving in, and I would invite all of you all to take this opportunity, take the bull by its horns. The stock market is showing you the way. Please do follow it. And I'm sure all of you all would be able to help Government of India, and Government of India is with you. Together, we should be able to build a recovering India from the pandemic. 2022 is not so much 75 years of India, but when free India's 100 years will arrive, 2047. We want a very robust economy, Indian industry at its biggest strength, and Indian industry standing up to the global challenges. With these words, I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Namaskar.
Thank you very much, Madam. As I mentioned yesterday at the Prime Minister's meeting, I have been really, and all of us have been impressed at the government's ability to work both at the big picture as well as focus on the detail. And that's something which I would give a lot of credit, in particular, to the Finance Ministry. Ma'am, you have laid out the roadmap and comforted us both on growth and areas like privatization and disinvestment in the context of your budget of the last year as we look at the balance part of this year. But we are on the verge of our Independence Day, and I'm going to take the liberty of pushing you a little longer, not 2047, but from 2022 to 2023, August 15, 23, which is going to be our 75 years complete, which is a period little longer than the budget period, peeking into a little bit of the year ahead. What would you like to see achieved on the 75 years Independence Day, which is a little more than a year from now, assuming we were sitting here and talking about 75 years complete of India in the next 1 year as a whole?
If I can risk it, I will say Atmanirbhar Bharat. If you noticed, I didn't use that word during my talk, because many of the things that we are doing are aiming at achieving it. So there wasn't much of a point for me to say it. I thought I should lay all those before you, which I'm taking as steps towards Atmanirbhar. I would actually, now that you've asked me this question, I would actually want India to be Atmanirbhar on a few things, like renewable energy should come into play in a very big way, that our dependence on the fossil fuel is brought to a minimum. That is one thing on which I want industry to be very proactive and engage in such a way that you're able to partner yourself with people for renewable energy capacities within India. Self-sufficiency in renewable energy is what? What is renewable energy self-sufficiency? If you're able to bring down the dependence on fossil fuel and build capacities within India for able to build renewable energy and also manufacture those things which are required, whether films, solar panels, if we are able to produce all of them, so that we are now going to be able to build capacities in renewable energy so that the dependence on fossil fuel is brought to a minimum. Therefore, when I say reliance on renewable energy will have to be such that we can self-produce those things which are raw materials for establishing renewable energy production places. So we don't need to be big in renewable energy, but depending on films and panels to come from outside. That capacity has to be built here. We should be able to have it for ourselves. One. Second, since we are leaders and we should continue to be leaders in using technology, we need to have chip manufacturing coming into India. I'd certainly want industry to understand this and make sure that partnering with big ticket investors, we are able to bring in chip manufacturing capacity into India. That's a second. Third, you are aware that the Prime Minister has announced a hydrogen mission. That's for very, in a way, it's a long-term kind of an investment. We need to understand the multifaceted capacity that hydrogen mission can have. We need to have capacities built in India. And therefore, I'm laying a lot of stress on Atmanirbhar in energy sector. That is one thing which I would think, if we are able to climb onto that bus, many things will be addressed in India. Otherwise, we will be paying through our nose for a fossil fuel, which in turn affects our environment. And we are paying for it, but affecting ourselves in affecting our economy and the environment. So that's one thing which I would lay emphasis on.
Thank you, Madam. I'll now request Mr. Sanjeev Bajaj to quote his question to you.
Thank you, Uday, and good afternoon, Madam FM. In the last year, a huge support that came from the government across the country was on the fiscal and monetary side, and many countries around the world naturally did the same. Now, we are seeing in some of the countries in the West, for example, if you see the US, with their levels of penetration of vaccination and the high growth that their economy is already seeing, talk has already started now of sunsetting the excess liquidity there. I just wanted to see from how you see this for us at our stage right now of the economy and the growth. Would it be fair to expect that in our situation, we need that continued support maybe going into next year, and we still have not reached that level?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think we've reached that level, and I'm glad that the RBI has been voicing that understanding that too quick a retrieval or sucking out of the liquidity from the economy may not do the necessary stimulus which is required. And I'm glad that the RBI has kept that understanding. And they have not given any indication about wanting to suck out the liquidity which is available there. And I'm glad for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Rishad Premji. Rishad, you're on mute. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Finance Minister, for your time, for your insightful comments, and for your passion for the economy. I have two specific questions on behalf of the IT industry. The first is on promoting R&D and innovation. As you are aware, many advanced countries have mechanisms through matching grants, incentives to promote innovation across industries and advanced technologies. Is there any thinking to encourage research in emerging technologies on similar lines? I know we've done this in the past with STPI and SEZ, which has really been a basis for the growth and the fascination and the movement we've seen in the IT industry. So that's the first question around R&D and innovation. The second question is on tax. And I was very pleased to hear your comments as well as the Honorable Prime Minister's comments yesterday on retrospective tax. As you may be aware, there are many open tax issues which are repetitive in nature and have been lingering for the IT industry over the last 20 years. In 2013, there was an attempt made through a committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Rangachari to address some of these issues, but they still remain unresolved. Would you be open to an idea of setting up a committee under the CBDT, like a mediation committee, to try and address some of these long-pending litigation issues?
Your second question first. Let me have from you a list of all those issues which you think are lingering still post the committee which was set up in 2013. I'm not for a moment denying that whatever you're saying, that they're probably lingering, but I would want to get an idea of what are those which you want to list out and say, well, this has never been addressed since 2013. I'd like to see them. So once I see them, I'll be able to take a call whether I need a committee for it, or is there a way in which I can have the present board address those issues? Because a committee, after all, has gone through it in 2013. And if there are issues, if there are no new issues, but the old ones are remaining pending, I don't need another committee to sit over it. I just need to move to give decisions. So let me have a list from you, please. As regards the R&D for services sector, and largely when you talk of services, you're talking of IT. I'm not sure I'll be the person to speak about what specific R&D that you are referring to or I may want to refer to. I would want to have the MeitY, Ministry of Electronics and IT, to be able to tell me about it, and also industry to be more specific to me, saying, what is it that you want now? I thought I'm not denying if you need help, we need to help, we need to extend the help. But since after the STPI and everything, India showed brilliant success in the way in which Indian private entrepreneurs have succeeded in setting up a large ecosystem for IT industries, and they've succeeded. Different layers had happened, from the backroom BPOs to providing project-based solutions to moving further. You're today now reaching a stage with R&D. I want to understand what is the nature of support you expect from the government, because the industry, once it reaches a certain level, determines its contours, like biopharma today. Bangalore is a big center, you are familiar with it, and the biopharma, the simulas that they are doing a lot of work on their own. But of course, the kind of support which they require from us is fairly well defined, and therefore it's possible for us to quickly ramp up and respond. So I would rather, on both your questions, therefore, my answer is, please write to me, please send me something more specific, let me respond.
And we will do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam. I know time has come to a point where you have other commitments. I just wanted to end by saying that, Madam Finance Minister, we are deeply grateful for the building of a two-way partnership which you are driving between business and industry, with a vision of the Prime Minister to transform India, and supported by various actions taken by your ministry in leading that transformation, working on financing of India's growth in that transformation, keeping the bigger picture in mind, at the same time being very open to going into the minutest detail to solve the issues which may be issues around business, industry, and the broader societal issues. Really, really appreciate and grateful for this. And once again, look forward to continued dialogue with you and your team over the days, years ahead. Thank you very much, and grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.